Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. Today I want to talk about grid synths. I have a few different projects lined up for you guys today that I want to take a look at. I'm just going to talk about my overall philosophy with my grid synths. Because over the last few weeks I have been writing a lot of different projects that involve grid synths. This is one of them. If you open up the synths and sequences group, you can see over here we have a segment that is just grid synths. We have another grid synth over here. This little guy here. And then there's also some that are in audio because this is a collaboration that I'm doing with Subject Ultra. So he sent over a couple of grid synths as well. We have some more rolling plugs here that also kind of act like grid synths. You can hear how those are kind of like the nice bed layers that all of the other grid synths sit on top of. And in this case, a lot of the grid synths also go accompanied by some drums. Now, generally speaking, when it comes to the elements in my tracks, what I personally like to do is I like to lay them out into different unique sections. This project over here is a very good example for that. As you can see, a lot of the sequences only play once or twice, and they're very restricted in where they play. Even the grid synths that sit in this project, which is this stuff over here, it only really plays in a very limited amount of time. As you can see, it plays over here, and then it plays over here. So this is the philosophy that I've been working with up until this point, that each element needs its own little space in the track, and that you're basically switching from sequence to sequence and therefore changing the main idea every time that you go into a new segment. But you can see that in this project, the grid synths sit throughout the whole project. As you can see over here, we have more grid synths over here that sit throughout the whole thing. This almost sits throughout the whole thing. We have the drums up here that almost sit throughout the whole thing. I am still selectively turning off and on different parts of the grid synths in different segments, but they're used much more broadly as opposed to just one or two segments. And what this essentially gives us is a basis for the groove in synth form as opposed to your normal drum form. Normally your drums are the part that are the groove, this stuff over here. Together, of course, with the movement of the kick and the bass. And maybe you even want to classify some orchestral drums in there. This is normally regarded as the full groove of the track. This is regarded as the elements that bring the groove in the track. And then all of the synth sounds and all of that kind of stuff are more the interest that you put on top of that groove as opposed to the actual groove itself. But in this current form, as you can hear, there are synths in there that just mainly act towards the groove. They're not an interesting idea that sit in the track. They're just steadily in the background grooving away with the rest of the groove elements. Sorry, quick intermission. Have you liked and subscribed yet? Thank you. Now let's get back into the video. Now right now this production of course is still in its very early stages. You can see that we're missing a lot of one-shots. You can see that we're missing a lot of other sequences that need to be placed on top of this. Because this is where the second philosophy comes in, and that is that we still want to have main elements on there that add extra interest to one part of the track over another one. So for example, over here we have one main element, which is this arp over here. And you can hear that is already really drawing the attention of the track over here. And you can hear that flute element that is basically sitting on top of everything else. So there's already a few different main elements in this track that are sitting on top of your grid synths over here. And that means that your grid synths don't have to change too much from time to time because they're just sitting in the background and they're not the main idea that are being provided here in the track. Now, of course, it is interesting to see if this philosophy will hold throughout the production. As I said before, we're very much still in the early stages of production, so there's a lot that still can change over time. And maybe after a few more elements being added to this track, it becomes a little bit less interesting and we change our minds on this idea. But it may also be an idea that just works really well. To convince you of that, I want to show you another example in which I implemented this technique. So now we're in this project over here. This is another collaboration that I'm working on together with Mortec. And this is a very interesting production because it's both in a key that I never work in, as well as in a BPM that I never work in. And that is the same for Mortec. So basically took our standard BPMs and our standard keys and we basically picked something in between, which in this case ended up being 140 BPM and the key of C sharp. So overall, it has a really nice sound to it and you guys have been really enjoying it in the recent shorts as well. So this is what just a segment of the drop sounds like. The main thing that stands out to me is this sound over here. This is just like a rolling idea over here. And this is just like the other elements that we talked about before, an element that I would describe as a groovy synth. An element that is a synth sound, a sequence, but that contributes to the groove of the whole track. And you can see that in the way that it's laid out, in that it plays in almost all of the sections. Again, this is currently still being worked on, so this may change in the future. I may decide to add it over here as well. One place that I'm not going to add it is over here, in this second drop over here, because we have different groove over here. If we play the kick and bass of this part over here, you'll hear that it's completely different to the parts that we heard before. That's just Mortec doing Mortec things. Anyway, it didn't feel right for me to continue the groove in here that is already being set up in the other parts. So what I ended up doing is I actually ended up making new grid synths over here, which are these sounds here. And they sit in the second part of the drop over here. And you can again hear that these are elements that contribute to the groove of the track. So what I decided to do in terms of philosophy for the grid synths over here is that I set up one groove over here with this particular synth mainly. Although there are some other synths in here that also help. So the whole group together is something that sounds like this. So we have that first groove over there, we then combine it with the second groove that we have over here, and that is how we get the groove for the third drop. As you can see, we're combining the elements of the first groove over here and the elements of the second groove over here together. So that is the whole philosophy of the grid synths. Now, how do you actually sequence them? Now for that, there's a few tips that I can give you. The very first tip is, since we're working in a groove aspect, you need to think of them as a groove element. And part of that means that it needs to work with the existing groove that you have. So make sure that you already have a kick and bass and some groove elements on top of that you're working with. That is our already existing groove, and then you just have to go element by element to add them to this existing groove. And you have to ask yourself, when you're adding these elements, what do they contribute to the musical idea? One of the things that you'll hear about this groove when it comes to the kick and bass is that it's really centered around the bar. Like every bar, there's a repetition of the bass line in terms of the pattern that it plays. And therefore, we can make use of that fact and also have the same kind of repetition in our grid synths. So for example, this synth over here, this one that we looked at before, that plucky one, You can hear how there's these two higher octave notes coming out every time in every bar. And it's doing it the exact same way, so this is just repeating the pattern over and over again. Now other synths over here, like the vocal that we saw before, that little vocal step, repeat every 2 bars, as you can see if I duplicate this over. Same is true for the stuff that's happening over here, as well as the stuff that is happening over here. But as you may all remember from school, 1 + 1 is 2, and therefore it is still part of the same kind of repetition, in the sense that it takes the idea that is repeating every bar, and it essentially turns that into 2 ideas, and then it takes that and it duplicates that over, and it duplicates that over. So that is how you take a 1 bar idea of this kind of groove that you have, and you just double it into a 2 bar idea, and then you start duplicating that over and over and over. And really, you could go on, you could also make it a 4 bar repetition if you really wanted to. For this particular track, I don't think that we're going for that, but maybe in the future we do add some extra elements that actually turns it into a 4 bar groove. There are parts where you could say that it's kind of happening because we have these one shots over here. As you can see, these one shots repeat in a 4 bar segment, and they do kind of have an influence on the groove, but not too much. As you can hear, there's a very strong main element in here that is already taking over, and then the one-shots that we have aren't particularly coming through very hard. You can hear them a bit in that they are sitting in the track, and you can definitely hear that this segment is sounding different from this segment, but it isn't really that obvious, so it's a little bit ambiguous. You could see this as a 2 bar repetition, you could see this as a 4 bar repetition of the groove, but honestly the most important thing in this is that there is some repetition that you're going off of, because at the end of the day the trance-like state that you're going to get into the listener is only going to come from repetition. If it's always completely random, if it's always completely chaotic, there isn't really a trance-like state that you can go into as a listener. That is, for example, the reason why we have the kick always on the 1. If you imagine all of the kicks being in random spots, it becomes really hard to dance to because it becomes unpredictable of what the track is actually doing. And the same is going to be true for your main grid synths because they are now part of the groove. So that is my new philosophy on grid synths. I hope that this is helpful for you as well. This of course is something that I would need to experiment with more, but that is of course what I'm doing as I'm currently working on the 2 collaborations. Now both of these collaborations are going to be part of my upcoming album that I'm currently working hard on. So if you're interested in hearing how it's going to sound when the tracks are all finished, make sure that you're subscribed to the channel. Another way to support the channel is by checking out some more of my content. So there will be 2 videos up on the screen right now for you to choose from. So just pick one and enjoy, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.